The Great Leap Forward was an economic and social campaign by the Communist Party of China from 1958 to 1961. The campaign was led by Mao Zedong and aimed to rapidly transform the country from an agrarian economy into a socialist society through rapid industrialization and collectivization. Some critics consider this campaign to have caused the Great Chinese Famine. Chief changes in the lives of rural Chinese included the introduction of mandatory agricultural collectivization, which was introduced incrementally. Private farming was prohibited, and those engaged in it were labeled as counter-revolutionaries and were prosecuted. Restrictions on rural people were enforced through public struggle sessions and social pressure, although people also experienced forced labor. Rural industrialization, officially a priority of the campaign, saw its development aborted by the mistakes of the Great Leap Forward. Critics claim the Great Leap ended in catastrophe, resulting in tens of millions of deaths. Although supporters claim the campaign did accelerate industrialization of the state, estimates of the death toll range from 18 million all the way to 45 million, with estimates from demographic specialists ranging from 18 million to 32.5 million. Historian Frank Decoder asserts that coercion, terror, and systematic violence were the very foundation of the Great Leap Forward, and it motivated one of the most deadly mass killings of human history. However, it is disputed whether these death numbers were accurate by pro-communist sources. The failure of agricultural policies, the movement of farmers from agricultural to industrial work, and weather conditions led to millions of deaths from severe famine. Many also died from quota-based execution instituted by government officials. The economy, which had improved since the end of the Civil War, was devastated. In response to the severe conditions, there was resistance among the populace. The effects of the upper levels of government in response to the disaster were complex, and Mao purging the Minister of National Defense, Peng Dehuai, in 1959, the temporary promotion of Lin Biao, Li Shaoqi, and Deng Xiaoping, and Mao losing some power and prestige following the Great Leap Forward, which led him to launch the Cultural Revolution in 1966. Despite the harmful agricultural innovations, the weather in 1958 was very favorable, and the harvest promised to be good. Unfortunately, the amount of labor diverted to steel production and construction projects meant that much of the harvest was left to rot uncollected in some areas. This problem was further escalated by the devastating locust swarm, which was caused by when their natural predators were killed as part of the Great Sparrow campaign. Although actual harvests were reduced, local officials, under tremendous pressure from central authorities to report record harvests in response to their innovations, competed with each other to announce increasingly exaggerated results. These were used as a basis for determining the amount of grain to be taken from the state to supply the towns and cities and to export. This left barely enough for the peasants, and in some areas starvation set in. A 1959 drought and flooding from the Yellow River in the same year also contributed to the famine. During 1958 to 1960, China continued to be a substantial net exporter of grain, despite the widespread famine experienced in the countryside, as Mao sought to maintain faith and convince the outside world of the success of his plans. Foreign aid was refused. When the Chinese foreign minister told his Chinese counterpart Chen Yi of an offer of 100,000 tons of wheat to be shipped out of public view, he was rebuffed. John F. Kennedy was also aware the Chinese were exporting food to Africa and Cuba during the famine and said, "We've had no indication from the Chinese communists that they would welcome any offer of food." With dramatically reduced yields, even urban areas suffered much reduced rations. However, mass starvation was largely confined to the countryside, where as a result of drastically inflated production statistics, very little grain was left for the peasants to eat. Food shortages were bad throughout the country. However, the provinces which had adopted Mao's reforms with the most vigor, such as Anhui, Gansu, and Henan, tended to suffer disproportionately. By 1959, it was obvious that the Great Leap Forward had been a failure, and even Mao admitted this. He called on the Communist Party to take him to task over his failures, but also asked his own party members to look at themselves and their performance.